You okay with that, Karen?
I'm good.
Oh God. That's fine. Okay, let's make a start then. As I mentioned this morning, I first started to realise things weren't right in this country in 1978-79, when I did some work for a campaign for nuclear disarmament, who were trying to organise meetings to get things together for the campaign, and they asked me, because I was working in helping meetings be more effective, they asked me, could you come along to our management? Can you come along to our... Is that still working? Right.
The battery's off back on that one. What's the battery gauge thing? Battery's flat.
Oh.
Yeah,
Right, I've got a loud voice. All right.
One on the seat.
Thank you. Let's try it. So we go. Is that better? Oh, good. They came along to me and said, we want a more effective meeting, and can you come to the meeting? And I went along to the time and date of the meeting, and there were 128 people sitting around a big table and standing around in the back, and that was their method of decision making, and it was absolute chaos. We couldn't get anything done, any agreements made. There was always somebody who had a question or something. Nothing happened. No wonder they were completely stable, if you like, getting nowhere at all. So anyway, that was my background in management development, organization development. I ran 6-8 companies in the long run, international consultancy companies, helping people to work together effectively. That's my background and experience. I had clients like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the United Nations Development Programme and big companies in this country. Every single one of them had a problem with working together in the organisation with the commitment of the employees. Every single one of them. Anyway, so in the light of that, I lost 2 companies through fraud. I started investigating fraud and corruption in business and government, particularly in boardrooms, and that's where it's happening. And over the following 4 years, I investigated 8 FT100 companies and 7 government departments on my own basis, not with any organisation or anything else, and only using information in the public domain. And everywhere I looked, I found corruption in spades. Just one quick example, BP. I looked at their annual accounts for 1998, and they were very proud. They sort of said, well, we never pay bribes. And in their accounts for 1998, they had a £400 million cost, a signature bonus. And I thought, what the hell's a signature bonus? And a £400 million signature bonus. In fact, what we discovered when we went into it was that they had paid bribes to 7 people in Angola to obtain offshore production and exploration licenses. And the money had gone to 7 people in Angola, and it was then used to stoke up the war in the Congo and Angola, and funded from Paris mainly. This is my background. So I started to look at corruption and fraud, and in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, we were being told at the time, and if you may remember thinking back to it, Blair and Lord Goldsmith, who was the Attorney General at the time, were saying that the war with Afghanistan was legal, and the upcoming war with Iraq would be legal. And eventually they sent a message to Parliament just before the debate in Parliament, saying that the upcoming conflict with Iraq would be legal on the grounds that the UN Security Council had authorized, under their resolutions 678, 687 and 1441, authorized the war. And so we went into war. I knew this was wrong and a lie, but I couldn't get anybody to listen to me at all. But this is where it really came into effect. I had discovered that we had been conned for 75 years over the illegality of war, and more importantly, over the illegality of paying for war. I suddenly realized, crikey, I'm part of the problem. Every time I pay tax, I am contributing a small amount, but significant, to the murder of men, women and children overseas. Now, since then, I've discovered that since 1946, Britain has waged 83 wars, 83 conflicts in other people's country, only one of which could possibly be described as legal. And that was the Falklands War, when Argentina attacked us and we responded. Now, under the UN Charter, we have agreed never to threaten or to use force and to settle all disputes peacefully. Those are the two main agreements in the United Nations Charter, to which 195 nations have signed up, and our governments have signed it on behalf of the people to say we will meet these standards. And we never do. We haven't met it once since 1946. Even the Falklands War was illegal in a number of ways. So just since 2000, as part of that move for peace that is in the rest of the world, we set up in 1998 the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. For 60 years, peacekeepers were trying to find a law enforcement process for the whole world. Because our nations, and particularly three of the big ones, Britain, America, Israel, seem to be breaking the law every damn day. We'd agreed never to threaten to use force. America had agreed never to threaten or to use force, and to settle all disputes peacefully. The two prime agreements in the United Nations Charter, and yet we broke it every day. So the smaller nations have come in and sort of said, we've got to do something about this. But one of the things they've done is to find a law enforcement system that would punish leaders who broke the law. Now, the first time it happened was at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, 1946. Germany's leaders were held to account in court for their crimes, and they were prosecuted and convicted, and some of them were hanged for invading and occupying 11 nation states in contravention or violation of the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Now, that was a most important law passed in 1928 after the First World War, which said we renounce war as a method of political operation, if you like. And of course, nobody paid any attention to it, and Germany and Italy and Japan in particular, and Britain and America breached it dramatically in the Second World War. But Germany's leaders were held to account for it. Now, that's exactly the same criminal offence as Bush and Blair and our leaders, Brown and all the rest of them, committed when they went into Afghanistan or Iraq, or that Libya. David Cameron took us into Libya and murdered 80,000 people with our money. We went into Syria. The first time it came up in Parliament, it was rejected, but so David Cameron lost his job, it was taken over, and the second vote on Syria was in favour of bombing and killing men, women and children in Syria. So I was having a quick totting up, and recently we are supporting other people's wars in the Ukraine, Gaza and the Yemen. Now, in total, since 2001, we have waged 4 wars and supported 3 others, and that has led to the deaths of about 2.4 to 2.5 million people, 1/3 of whom are children. That's the bit that always gets me. We've murdered 800,000 children. Sorry. So I realized that my money was leading to this. If we stopped paying for this, we wouldn't have any wars. So I've been trying for nearly 20 years now to get myself together. 2003, I stopped paying council tax because I realized it was a criminal offence. I was contributing to the murder of innocent men, women and children. And that's what it is. We call it defence in this country. There's nothing at all defensive about any of our actions. The nearest it came to it was in, as I say, the Falklands, but everything else has been aggressive. We are going into other people's countries, murdering their people, destroying their property, and calling it lawful. And our leaders do it over and over again and get away with it. No British leader has been prosecuted for these crimes for, well, 100 years. The only people who get prosecuted are the sort of very low-level soldiers who are asked to murder people in Basra or wherever it is. So, in light of all of this, I stopped paying council tax, and as a result of that, for 10 years I managed to get away with it in different parts of London. I said, no, I'm not going to pay it, and so on, and they didn't bother to chase me. I moved to Rye in Sussex about 2013, and had to pay local council tax. Now, as part of a group there, I was asked, would I have a look at some of the dodgy business that was going on in the area, in Rye Town Council, in Rother District Council, and around the area, and with our MP, who was Amber Rudd. You may have heard of her. She later became the Home Minister, Home Secretary. So I did that and put out a report pointing out all the crimes that were going on, and there were massive crimes going on. There was a £32 million fraud called the Community Infrastructure Levy, which enabled the council to have its own taxation on new houses in order to provide infrastructure for them, which meant that every new house for young people, particularly, had an extra £30,000 onto it from the council, let alone from the mortgages and all the other things. So I pointed this out to them, and unfortunately, they then sent me to prison for non-payment of council tax, because they didn't want this information to get out, and the best place to stop it getting out is to put you inside. Anyway, I kept trying for the following year, and the following year up from that. So for 3 years in a row, I refused to pay council tax on the grounds that I would be committing a criminal offence if I handed the money to them, because they were using my money. It all went into what's called a consolidated fund for the government, and 10%, even 15% of that was used supposedly for defence, but in reality to murder men, women and children overseas. So that's why I got onto it. In 2016, I thought, well, I can't carry on like this, keep you sending me into the bloody prison. And I'm trying to uphold the law, I've got to find a different way around it. And that is the important bit, is I started to discover the value of trusts. The top 100,000 people in this country put all their money in trusts, not all of it, but most of it, in trusts overseas, in the Cayman Islands or Guernsey or Jersey or somewhere like that. They hide it from the taxman. So we're the people that are paying the taxes, and the top people in this country avoid all those taxes. But they put it in trust. Now, the important thing is when you put money in trust, it doesn't belong to you anymore. You give it to your trustees for your beneficiaries. And that's a very important point. And so what I realized was that we put all our taxes in trust for the beneficiaries, and on condition that they would use the money solely for lawful purposes. None of this killing and warfare and so on, all of which is a criminal offence in both international and domestic law. And it's worked, I'm pleased to say. Since 2017, I have been getting bills from the council, and I just send them a copy of my trust deed, putting all my money, taxes in trust, and they can't do anything about it in a way. They try, they send around enforcement agents and bailiffs and send me to court and various other things. I'm slowly learning the sort of things that I have to avoid all of that completely, but they need to know that I have put my money in trust. I paid it. The nice thing is I paid my council tax every year into trust. So I got a bill from them this summer, last summer, June, this summer, for £166. According to our records, you owe us £166. Now, I hadn't paid them about £12,000 But obviously what they do is they just write it off at the end of the year and start again, you know. And this is really, we need to understand the system. They need any system they can to get the money from us, and they will try everything except taking it to court. Because if they went to court on our argument, they would lose. And that would immediately have an effect for all taxpayers throughout the UK and very other nations as well. So they won't take it to court under any circumstances, but they will try to find all sorts of reasons for stopping it. So what I want to do very briefly is to go through the taxation trust deed so that you all understand it, and by the end of the afternoon you're in a position to sign it and have it witnessed, and so that you can take it away from today. It is your passport to freedom, tax freedom forever. Once you've signed this, they have to do what you want them to do, not what they want you to do. Okay, so has everybody got a copy now? I want to work through it. It's a declaration of sovereignty and deed of revocable conditional trust and withdrawal of consent to mandatory taxation. So it's a declaration of sovereignty. We've just heard from Sovereign Pete about that. The importance of that is you are a sovereign individual. You are a sovereign man or woman, and that's it. And we need to declare that, and as soon as you've declared it, they know where you stand. It's also a deed of revocable conditional trust. Let me say that trust is managed through trustees, particularly where there's large sums of money involved, or estates, or land, or other property. So this is your deed of trust, and by the end of the afternoon, you just have to sign it and have it witnessed. From that moment on, you are protected. So I'll go into why. A revocable conditional trust, it means that it's time limited, and I think Pete was saying that it's important to have everything time limited. Now what we've done is, in this document, done it until the end of the taxation year. So I've been doing mine, I do a separate one every year, and I do it until the 5th of April the following year. That is the last day of the tax year. On the 6th of April, it is revoked. It is no longer going to the government. This has been held in trust for the government, for the council, for all the other institutions who are demanding money from me, including the energy companies or the DVLA or whoever it is, or parking fines, whatever it is. It's all goes into what's called the consolidated fund in this country. In Scotland, for instance, a lot of people I've heard saying, well, we have a separate system for taxes in this country. It's only very slight. The British government granted the Scottish Parliament the ability to tax three things, and they get an income of about 8 million a year from those three things, something like that, very small. All the rest of it goes to Westminster and Whitehall, and it comes back to Scotland via a grant from the British Parliament. So you need to know everything that's going, that you pay in tax, both directly and indirectly, is going to the British government at some point. So revocable means that on the 6th of April, you revoke their ability to claim tax from you, and you pass the money to the secondary beneficiary. Now it is important to keep the primary beneficiary and the secondary beneficiary separate. This has been worded so that not only are you the settler, that is, you settle money in trust, your taxes in trust, but you're also the trustee. You can be a trustee of your own trust, and that's important. But you are not the primary beneficiary. The money is settled in trust for the government, the council, for all those other bodies, 230 of them in total, that raise money for the government. And last year, as you would see in the documentation, it was about £1 trillion raised in tax in Britain. £1 trillion. Now there's 45 million or 40 million taxpayers. So 40 million into a trillion is about £25,000 each. So we are unwittingly contributing £25,000 each to the government, of which they use 10 to 15%, £2,500 to £3,000 for mass murder and genocide. And that's what we've got to stop. So this is the purpose of all of this. This is a lawful way of ensuring never again do we contribute to the war crimes of our government. It's conditional, and the important bit is on the back of this you will find under paragraph 21, last page, the trust conditions. So I'd just like to go through them. Now, longer term, you'll be able to put down your own conditions, but what we're suggesting is adopt these four because these are powerful, and the more of us who do these conditions together, the more likely we are to succeed, which is to put all sorts of conditions from now on, because you are in charge, not the government, not Parliament, not the monarch, you, and it's your conditions. It says, I further declare and say that if prior to the end of the financial year, I, as trustee of this trust, receive incontrovertible documentary evidence from the Court of Sessions, the High Court, the UK Supreme Court, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice, that the primary beneficiary has done four things. One, has ended all involvement in the wars, killings, and criminal acts identified in paragraphs 2, 3, 4, and 18 above. Two, is acting in full accordance with the UN Charter and the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law. Can we just check how many people have heard of that second thing? Declaration on Principles of International Law. 1, 2, great, 3, 4. Well, that's brilliant. That's more than normal, I might say. This is the single most important legal advice ever provided to the world. What happened was in 1962, the smaller nations in the United General Assembly were complaining about the Security Council nations breaking the law. So the General Assembly gave the job to the International Law Commission. And the job was to come up with a definition of the meaning of the UN Charter, where it says, never threaten or use force and settle all disputes peacefully. What does that mean? Because our governments, the senior ones, were breaking it every damn day. So they came out after 8 years of work, they came out with a very important document. It's got 42 principles in it, and I've included a couple of them in this documentation, and I'll read through them in a second. Number 3 of the conditions is has initiated criminal proceedings against the leading instigators, perpetrators, bankers, financiers, investors, advisors, company directors, public officials, and natural persons complicit in the criminal acts of the primary beneficiary identified in paragraph 18 above. Basically, this is going through every one of our leaders. You know, Tony Blair, the cabinet, Jack Straw, and all that lot who got us into the Afghan and Iraq wars. David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, and now Keir Starmer. All of them are committing the world's worst crimes, and they need to be arrested. And we can force their arrest if we stop paying the police to arrest us. We need the police to arrest them and to charge them in a proper court. A C-A-U-G-H-T. Court. So that's number 3, and it applies to everybody in this country. Now, what we've tried to do is divide it into different levels of responsibility. So we have 5-star war criminals, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, and 1-star. Now, everybody who continues to pay tax, knowing that some of the money will be used for mass murder and genocide, is a 1-star war criminal. We need to be aware of that. Because we'll go through the detail of it, why that is, but people like Tony Blair and so on, 5-star. and let's start with the 5-star. And then people might then realise the seriousness of what we're doing and switch over completely. So that's why we've got to do it. Lastly, has granted me immunity from prosecution for any and all offences associated with the failure to pay money to the primary beneficiary after the commencement of this declaration. So you need to, by the end of the afternoon, make sure that you sign this within the next couple of days, and from that moment on you are protected. And it's important to realise that, because this is a genuine legal trust and has as much power as the trusts they use, in fact more power than the trusts they use in the Cayman Islands or anywhere else to hide their money and property. Right, just one or two other things I want to go into. I'd like to just go through the first page, number 4. So if you get time to read through 1 to 3, you'll see that this is the problem. We're trying to put the problem over. It's brought to our, number 2 says, it's been brought to my attention the British and Scottish governments, successive Prime Ministers, Attorneys General, Advocates General, Ministers of State, MPs, MSPs, Commanders-in-Chief, etc., have deceived Parliament, Her Majesty's military forces and the public for decades over the illegality and criminality of war and its funding. Their repeated claims that war is legal are totally false. War is never legal. It was renounced in 1928 and it has never been legal since then. Not one of the wars, including the Second World War. So we've used so much money killing men, women and children. We need to do something about it. So number 4 says, I now know that if I pay money to the UK or Scottish governments, to UK public authorities, that includes councils and others, institutions, corporations, or their agents, knowing that some of it may be used for purposes of war, terrorism, or genocide, I will be liable for arrest, prosecution, and imprisonment under the Terrorism Act 2000 and the International Criminal Court Scotland Act. That applies in Scotland, by the way, all the way. It's different law from England and Wales. For the criminal offences of fundraising for purposes of terrorism and conduct ancillary to war crimes and or genocide. So we'll go through the detail of the genocide in a couple of minutes, but the important bit is that anyone who charges you with money is committing a criminal offence, and you can prove it, of conduct ancillary to genocide or fundraising for purposes of terrorism, or both. So we need to inform them of that. This is why this is so important, is that they stop their ministrations on us as a result of that.
So in this declaration, you are giving authority to the UN, that's right?
No, we're not giving our authority to the UN. We're taking it on ourselves. What I'm doing is really trying to uphold and enforce the laws that have been agreed with the rest of the world. Unfortunately, Britain and the British people tend to see ourselves as separate from the rest of the world, particularly in relation to law. And no one in Parliament, in government, or anybody else knows or understands the laws we've agreed with the rest of the world. And those are the most important ones of all. So what I'm really saying is, it's about time we started to uphold the laws agreed with the rest of the world. And they are also, now, of course, the government will come back and say, no, well, we don't abide by international law, you have to, this sort of thing. But the important bit is that international law and jurisdiction has no jurisdiction in this country until we bring it into domestic law. And this is the power of knowing about the International Criminal Court Scotland Act, because when you look at the details, and let's do it now, on page, it's number 12 on page, whatever that is, 4. If you turn to that now, you'll see the criminal offences that are applicable to Scotland, particularly. In 2001, the government ratified the Rome Statute by enacting the International Criminal Court Scotland Act 2001. This law makes it a criminal offence in Scotland for a person to engage in war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, or conduct ancillary to such crimes. And that's where we come in. It's the conduct ancillary.
This is quite a weighty piece of
Yes, information.
that we've got here, and we will be liable for imprisonment and stuff under terrorism if we sign this. So my question...
No, hang on. That's completely incorrect.
So they can't imprison us.
They can't imprison you anymore.
My point was, I mean, we pay tax at the pump that goes to the government,
Yeah.
which will be used for war. We pay tax on alcohol that goes to the government that is used for the war. So does this get us out of paying tax for that as well?
Absolutely. Every bit of money that goes to the government in any way whatsoever, either directly or indirectly, is committing a criminal offence.
So how do we challenge that?
Well, I'll come to that in a second. All right?
Okay.
The important bit is to realise this is your passport to freedom. It is not going to send you to prison.
Right.
I only developed it after being sent to prison 3 years. I said, I've got to find a different way. This is crazy. So you can't get sent to prison now. I don't think you can get sent to prison for a civil offence in Scotland. Certainly can't in Wales, but you can in England, unfortunately. But the main issue is that none of our courts actually are so corrupt that they will send you to prison, whatever you do. So we have to find ways of making them aware that they are committing the worst crimes known to mankind.
Chris, can I just add, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights removes the ability to put you in prison for a civil debt. So what in England happens, how they get around it, is they hold you in contempt of court, which itself is a scam, because you can only be in contempt of court if you interfere with evidence, tamper with evidence, or interfere or threaten the witness. So you can't be in contempt, but no one knows that, so they get away with it. But civil debt, tax, and prison do not go together, right?
Yes.
Across the world.
Thank you, David. It's important to point that out.
Chris, I've read through the document and what you've done is excellent. My question is that the Triple Crown involves not just the banks and the governments and the royal families, but also the Vatican. And should we also perhaps consider including spiritual equity in terms of the document?
That's a very good question. I'm limiting this to our nations at the moment, but internationally, under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, I don't think the Vatican is signed up to but we could get them prosecuted in various countries like Ireland and others for what they have done in funding genocide.
But given that they have captured the souls of everybody through the Guthrie card, we still come under their crimes as well.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that I pay no attention. My soul is outside of that system, and I keep it outside of that system. So we need to just use the laws that they have tried to develop. This law was brought in 2001 by Tony Blair's government. The Terrorism Act was brought in 2000 by Tony Blair's government. And they pay no attention at all to it. And we've just got to get starting on them to say, no, it applies to you. It applies to every one of us. And that's the important bit. So let me just quickly go through this. The important bit here is Article 2 of the International Criminal Court Scotland Act, conduct ancillary to genocide. Be absolutely clear what this means, because this is the crime they are committing. It shall be an offence for a person to engage in conduct ancillary to genocide, a crime against humanity, or a war crime. Then they go on to define what do we mean by conduct ancillary? What is an ancillary offence? And this is again taken straight from the law or the legislation. References in this part of this Act to an ancillary offence are to A, being art and part in the commission of an offence. That is a Scottish offence. Inciting a person to commit an offence. Attempting or conspiring to commit an offence. Perverting the course of justice in connection with an offence. So Keir Starmer, for instance, could be had under that one of perverting the course of justice and causing the deaths of many, many people. So could Tony Blair and all the rest of them. And lastly, defeating the ends of justice in connection with an offence. So either of those last two, we can hold our leaders to account. And what we've got to do is start criminal prosecutions against them. And we are starting to get that going. And I would recommend that as you get to understand this document, you work with local people and say, now how can we start prosecuting our local sheriffs, our local courts, councils and others who are all together committing the worst crimes known to mankind. We've got to stop it. The last part is important because both the parliaments will say, well, we're immune. This doesn't apply to Parliament. That's completely incorrect. It applies to every single person in this country. So, Crown application. This Act binds the Crown and applies to persons in the public service of the Crown and property held for the purpose of the public service of the Crown, as it applies to other persons and property. And remember, money is property. So, it applies all the way through to King Charles, to the Prime Minister, to the Ministers of State, to MSPs, to everybody. So let's be aware of that. I think the other thing I just want to do is a lot of people say to me, well, this is not really genocide, is it? I've had lawyers over and over again saying, well, that's not genocide. And they don't know the law. It's been very clearly laid out. If you look at page 5, number 13, there is a very interesting statutory instrument that was brought in and agreed by Parliament called the International Criminal Court Act 2001, Elements of Crimes Regulations. Now, what this does is it specifies the elements of genocide that must be proved beyond reasonable doubt in a court if a jury is to find a person guilty of the crimes of genocide or conduct ancillary to genocide. So the first one is genocide by killing. And there are 4 criteria that must be met. The first is the perpetrator killed or caused the death of one or more persons. 2 is such person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnic, racial or religious group. And the particular one that I'm focusing on is the national group. So when you kill an Iraqi because they're Iraqi, or an Afghan because they're in Afghanistan, you're killing a person because of their nationality, not because of what they've done to you, or whether they've attacked you, or whether they own weapons of mass destruction or anything else. That's the law. The third one is the difficult one to prove. The perpetrator intended to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial or religious group. I have a couple of examples. To show they intended to kill Afghans and Iraqis. In 2003, March the 18th, there was a debate in Parliament on whether or not we would go to war with Iraq. And it was a long debate, 7 hours, and a lot of people took part in that, MPs. And right at the end, Jack Straw, who was the Foreign Secretary, he was there to sort of summarise the thing on the part of the government. He said, words to the effect, I can't remember exact words, but words to the effect that we've had a good discussion tonight. There will be consequences of our decision. Some of our troops will be killed. So too will innocent Iraqi civilians. I urge you to vote with the government tonight. Now that couldn't be clearer. Intent to commit genocide and kill innocent Iraqi civilians because they were in Iraq, not because they've done anything to us. Now that's the sort of evidence we need to bring out in court. I have tried many times and I will keep trying, but it will help with a lot of people. The last one is the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself effect such destruction. It is important. So, waging war is a manifest pattern of similar conduct. You don't just fire one cruise missile and then say, oh, that was a mistake, it killed 14 people, well, we didn't mean to do that. What happens is that the British government then fired, attacked, had active attacks in Iraq of at least 40,000 times, killing Iraqis. And whether they were soldiers or civilians makes no difference, but 40,000 is a manifest pattern of similar conduct. So it is important to understand this and let our people and our councillors and MSPs and MPs and everybody else understand it. Because if they start to understand they are intimately involved in conduct ancillary to genocide, they may stop doing what they're doing. Some of them anyway. Okay, I think that's probably enough to go through. I would recommend that people read this, and what we found is that if you have a local group, you probably need to go through it 3 or 4 times to really understand it together with your local group, and then start to decide which of our local councillors or sheriffs or MSPs or whatever it is we want to draw this attention to, or their attention to this. And then you can start seeing how, if they reject it completely, then we can start down criminal prosecutions of our local leaders as well as the national leaders. But just a quickie on the national front, sorry, the national... yes. I'm hoping that they might do it as well. It would be really useful. Anyway, just to explain what we've been doing. We've had, myself and my colleagues set up a group called Make War History many years ago, and we started reporting war crimes to every police force in the country, including, at that time, there were 4 or 5 Scottish things. They've all now been brought into one. And we had over 300 attempts by letter, by dropping into police stations and other things, and phone calls and so on. But of those 300, most of them were turned down, or I remember being thrown out of a police station for reporting war crimes. I thought the police station was there for that purpose, but it isn't. So what happened was that 5 of them got as far as the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity unit at Scotland Yard. How many people have heard of that unit? That's very interesting. They are the most important police unit in this country for prosecuting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So what will happen is, if you take it into a local police station, they have to pass it on to that unit. So that unit has all the power of whether or not to bring a prosecution, a public prosecution. We can also do private prosecutions. We can talk about that at the tea break or whatever. But so we went in there, and they rang me up and said, "Will you come in and explain the thing?" And I went in 5 times for 3 hours at a time in Belgravia police station, going through all the evidence of the crimes committed by Tony Blair, Jack Straw, Jeff Hoon, all the cabinet, Lord Goldsmith, the Attorney General, and the heads of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and SAS, and the key civil servants who were pushing all of this. So we had 25 people in line for prosecution, and after a couple of hours, the police initially they thought, "Oh, this is just mad protester or something." But anyway, after a while, they took it seriously. They realised this is what the law says. This is what has happened. It's quite obviously a criminal offence. So they passed the information on to the Crown Prosecution Service. It's their job to prosecute, to set up the prosecution of our leaders. Now they had it for about a month, and the senior woman there. She didn't really know what to do, but luckily they promoted her to a job in North Lancashire or somewhere. So she had a promotion, and they passed the case to the most junior person in Ludgate Hill, which is at that time was where the Crown Prosecution Service was. 6 weeks later, we got a letter from them saying, well, we're not going to go ahead with the prosecution on the grounds that you have not provided evidence of intent to commit war crimes, intent to commit crimes against humanity, or intent to commit genocide. And in fact, we had provided massive evidence, the sort of thing that I just said, like Jack Straw said. But they got away with it. And we put it in again and again, 3 times in total, and got nowhere. Interesting enough, the DPP in charge of the CPS at that time was Keir Starmer. Surprise, surprise. He knew he was the one person in this country who could start a case against Tony Blair for genocide. Interesting, about 4 years ago, he was saying, well, I knew at the time that the war was illegal.
He also saved Joey Sample from prosecution.
Yeah.
No. But honestly, that man is one of the most evil men I've ever come across. I've been up with him before. Along with Tony Blair and the rest of them. David Cameron in particular.
The war committed treason against the country and the British people, and they need hundreds.
Yeah. I mean, it is possible that if we can find it and find a good court and a good judge and a good jury, that's the important thing, we need to hold these people to account.
We need somebody who gives evidence.
Yes, I don't think there are any in government.
No.
Well, there was one man, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, actually, he worked in a group with me, and he had decent ethical values as well as moral values. And he still has. But of course, he was steered out of the situation by Keir Starmer. Right, I think that's probably enough for the moment. I've gone on along with my plan.
Chris, can I? Oh, sorry.
Chris, just very quickly, do you personally, and would we all have to pay what we think tax is due into a specific separate trust account?
Yes.
And secondly, to whom do you send this deed?
You said, the first question first, yes. Put 10% of the money you owe to the government or anybody else into a separate box at home or strong box or an account if you've got it. But the important thing, it mustn't be in your name personally, it must be in your name as trustee, because you have given it to somebody else. Now you can actually appoint somebody else if you want to, but this is written in such a way that you can be your own trustee and the secondary beneficiary. So at the end of the year, when all the money doesn't go to the government, your trustee, and that's you with another hat on, has to pay the money to the settler, if that's what's written into the trustee, which it is. So you get the money back on the 6th of April. Now you can do that both as an individual and as a corporation. So what was the second question?
Why only 10%? Sorry, I know you want to press
Yeah.
it. Why 10%? Why not 20 or 5 or 90?
Well, you can put it all in, but basically the least amount that you're showing is a reasonable payment towards your taxes is 10%. So, for instance, courts will accept that, most of them, apart from the corrupt ones, will accept that as a first payment. So, for instance, in council tax, we pay 10 monthly sums, or all in one go, and that's your choice. So you can put all the money, if you like, in there, but what you must have is a minimum of 10%. And it doesn't have to be all in cash. You can do a promissory note. You can do a check dated to the last day of the financial year for the whole amount to your council or to the Revenue and Customs, whoever it is. So you have a number of options available to you, but you must keep the money separate from your personal finances. That's the important bit. So, and this role of trustee is a separate hat on that you need to understand that you're moving this. You have a separate legal duty, and your legal duty is to follow the conditions of the trust to a T.
second question was just to whom do you send this, if anyone?
Anybody
You get a
who's
bill
asking
from
you for
HMRC.
money who's included in the list of primary beneficiary.
So you get a bill from HMRC, you just send them a copy of this.
Yes, you must send them a copy. I mean, if they want a bill of £30,000 for you, or what from you, inheritance tax, stamp duty, whatever it is, you send them a copy of this deed and said, I've actually paid this money. I've paid it into trust for you, and you can have it as soon as you prove to me not a penny of it be spent for these purposes. You just go back to the conditions. So it's anybody, the council, the DVLA, bailiffs, courts, whoever is charging you money is committing a criminal offence, and you say to them, you are committing a criminal offence. I will be committing a criminal offence if I hand the money to you, so I have paid it into trust for you to ensure that you uphold and enforce the law. And that's all we have to do. If the law is laid out in 4 pages, I would recommend going through it in some detail. Perhaps just one I would go into right from the beginning, because it is important.
Have you not to name the trust?
Pardon?
Have you not got to name the trust?
This is your personal trust, so by putting your name in the top line, you are settling as a settler and saying that
Well,
I
that's
as,
not.
yeah, so it's yours.
Well,
Keep
where's
it.
the money going and here?
Well, no, you put it into a separate strongbox, but keep it separate. The best way is to put it into a folder labelled trustee, or a strongbox labelled trustee, so that you can prove in court it no longer belongs to you. And that's the important bit. It doesn't belong to you until, if you're lucky, you get it back on the...
And I couldn't get my head around that. I used yours against the council tax before, but I couldn't get my head around that. Now, where was the trust, like where's the number? Where's...
It doesn't have to be a registered trust. That only applies to certain ones, and that is part of the government system to trick you into going with them. So this is a trust deed that is yours, and you as a sovereign man or woman have signed it and declared it.
Is this a bit like a promissory note that is saying that your money is in that?
Yeah, it is, yes.
Under the bed or something?
Yes, so if you look at the last page, you'll see number 22. So number 21 was saying these are conditions I must meet.
Yeah.
If, however, I as trustee find that the conditions of this trust have not been met by the last day of the financial year, and the primary beneficiaries continue to fund, support, plan, prepare, or take part in illegal or criminal acts of terrorism, warfare, or genocide, then the primary beneficiary's right to the money will be automatically revoked, and the money will be returned to the secondary beneficiary. And in brackets, I mean, if you had someone else to excuse me, if it's somebody else, you can put their name down, but you are the settler, and it comes back to you.
I understand that, but there was a lot of other people I heard, because I was on the ledge of the day for like before day, and I think there was a few people said, where is the trust, and I don't think they could get their head around it.
No, it's just a little bit complicated. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, but on the Probity Code website, there is all the details, trusts and letters and so on. And also, if you're interested, and put your name, register your name on the Probity Code website, probitycode.com website. You can join a question and answer session we have every Monday, every 2 weeks. And you will hear a lot of these sort of questions brought up, and we have answers for them and so on. But I would recommend really getting together with a group of 3 or 4 local people who are on board with this. And together you will come up with a stronger position than any one of you will on your own. And that's the important bit, it's doing it together.
Chris, there's a question over here, please.
Hi, Chris. Thank you again for your wonderful information. The more you say it, the more it sticks in my face. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about witnessing the trust. So you need to have a witness. Can I ask why, because I know you mentioned on Friday it wasn't to be a family member?
Because it's quite often thought by the courts just to be a tax evasion process.
Okay.
if it's a family member, but the important bit is that if it's an independent person who knows you, and it's their signature, all they have to do is, if it goes to court, and if the prosecution says this is a fraudulent document, the witness can say, no, it's not. I saw whoever it is, you sign this, and I have put my signature to that
And that's all
observation.
you're doing by signing that as a witness, is all they're saying is that we see you sign that.
Correct, and they know you.
And you would rather know it was a family member in case it.
Yet not a family member. It's dangerous to have a family member do it because you can get done in a number of ways. There's a question at the back there.
What happens if you pay your income tax?
Sorry?
You pay your income tax.
All right. It's basically there's a corporate trust, and we need to go in very briefly into that. A lot of people are paying PAY and national insurance to their company. The company takes it before you even get sight of it and hands it to the Revenue and Customs. That's a criminal offence by the directors of the company, or the managers, or whoever does it is committing a criminal offence. Now we need to take it slowly with them and bit by bit show them that actually we are upholding the law and they need to too. So they can put the money in corporate trust. On our website there's a corporate deed of trust for companies to put all the PAY and national insurance in for the whole year, and then on the last day, and have independent trustees, and I'm actually an independent trustee of 3 or 4 of these trusts now. On the last day of the financial year, the trustees say, well, you haven't met the conditions, the same as in here, and therefore the money goes back to the employees. Now the directors will be pleased about that because not in most companies they are employees and they have very large salaries and they get very large amounts of money back. Also, the threat is that they could be prosecuted for not doing this, and that's important. So prosecute them not only under the International Criminal Court Act, but also under Section 19 of the Terrorism Act. Let me just quickly go into that.
How does that go with your pension?
Sorry?
How does that go with your pension if you're not paying your tax?
Yes. Yeah, so the important bit is to advise employees to put their money, some of the money, in a personal pension at the end of the year. Don't just spend it, but put it in a personal pension. Now, the difference between the company, the organized country's pension scheme and your personal pensions are that the government spends the money now in the hope that taxpayers in 30 years or 20 years, whenever you're going to retire, will fund your pension. It's a scam of massive proportions, but at least if you put your money into a personal tax pension fund, you'll be safer. I'm not saying totally safe, but safer.
Not totally safe.
I worked for a...
Not just present this document to HR, and their legal department can read it, and they'll know that we've informed that they're quite right that they continue to do what they're doing.
Yes, and it's very important. By the way, it's not just that document, it's a copy of that document.
Yes.
Never, keep the original always, never send the original to anybody else.
I worked for a Canadian guy, right? For 10 years. For 10 years, he was taking the funds for the tax. We went to court. He buggered off back to Canada and left us with nothing. So now I've got a pension. I'm only getting half a pension.
Yeah, I mean, there's some
I can't
appalling
find that.
stories I've heard, and
Yeah.
I've had it myself, you know, and all sorts of difficulties. The issue really is that government and the government bureaucrats don't follow the law in the courts, in the civil service, anywhere else. They are more ignorant than everybody in this court. So our job is to start to educate them about what the law actually says. And you have the documents here. If you want to set up a local thing with your local council, and you can organise a meeting with half a dozen of the local councillors and maybe 1 or 2 tax accountants and so on, I'm very happy to come up and present all this information together with you to your council so that they start to act on our behalf and not on behalf of the government.
I just wanted to clarify for me,
I have a problem with Bank of Scotland, who have removed money from my bank account to give to a third party. And I have put on notice head of legal in London and in Edinburgh.
Good.
And they are still threatening to take more money from my account. They've taken 2 lots of £400 almost, and they say they're going to be taking more in November. So could I use this to send to the bank, back to Bank of Scotland and to the council and to the debt collectors to show them that I have this? Would that put a stop to it?
Well, it may not put a stop to it, but it's the first step. It's essential. Anybody who is a primary beneficiary, they have to be informed of the conditions that you are putting on the payment of trust. You can't just put it in trust and not let them know, because they need to know the conditions they've got to meet, and it's working through those conditions before that is going to be important. But there are a number of things that we can do as well, and that's why I wanted to look at Article 19 of the Terrorism Act, if I can find it. This is one of the most extraordinary legislations that have been passed in this country. This section applies where a person believes or suspects that another person has committed an offence under any of sections 15 to 18. So the 3 people you named have committed offences under sections 15 to 18. And basis is believed on suspicion or on information which comes to his attention in the course of a trade, profession, or business, or his employment, which is what's happening to you. 2, the person commits an offence if he does not disclose to a constable or sheriff, as soon as is reasonably practicable, his belief or suspicion and the information on which it is based. So if they're paying no attention to these 2 £400 removals from your thefts, from your account, then they are sending you know that they are committing an offence under section 15 and 17, which is written prior to that. So go into the detail of it, and you'll see they're committing an offence, and it's your job to report them for fundraising for purposes of terrorism under section 19 of the Act. You are committing a criminal offence if you fail to report them. And this is the extraordinary thing about it.
So who would I be reporting them to?
You report them to a constable, to the police.
I thought about going to Police Scotland, and I thought they'll just laugh at me.
Well, get them to read their own law. This is just taken straight from the law.
Right.
And there are lots of other sections that if they don't act on your report, then they can get into trouble themselves. And I think David mentioned this in the Criminal Courts and Police and Criminal Courts Act, wasn't it?
Section 26 in England, Police and Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015.
Brilliant. So anyway, you should be sure about that. This is happening to a lot of people, by the way, not just you.
And get a crime number from Police Scotland.
That's ideal,
Yeah.
if you can.
You'll probably get an incident number. I was given an incident number. A group of us did this in Eastbourne. Given an incident number, but 3 weeks later we heard nothing, which they told us we would have heard. So we went back and they said the case has been closed. So I took it further. I wrote to the Police and Crimes Commissioner for Sussex, and they told me that if I'm putting a complaint in, I've got to go to the Independent Complaints Department, Professional Complaints Department for the police. And I said, this isn't a complaint, this is an observation that a crime has been committed and you're not researching. You're not doing your research. We've done the research. I put in the letter. If 4 retired men and women can research this and come up with the evidence, why can't you? You don't have to come up with the evidence, we've got it there for you, but why can't you?
Yeah, I mean, I could print off my bank statement to show the money
Yes.
being moved to my account.
You need
That's
that as evidence.
That's
You need it as evidence. We're running out of time now, I'm afraid we'll have to cut it out.
The complaints department pushed me back to the Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner. And and they was playing ping pong with it.
Can I just butt in? Right. That is not, in my opinion, this is not a criminal matter. It's a data protection issue.
Yes.
Okay, it's not a criminal. The police will just laugh at you. Okay, so let's have a reality check there. Now, while Chris was talking, my little brain was getting creative. We've been talking about acts of terrorism and genocide. What has happened in the last 4 years that fits that description? And what is coming around the corner, right? Because COVID was just a dress rehearsal, so you have to say dress rehearsal for what? Well, whatever it is, it's coming around the corner. And whatever it is, if it's publicised in a certain way, that will be an act of terrorism. And if it's rolled out in a certain way, killing a lot more people, even more than the COVID jab, that will be an act of, well, genocide. Total genocide. I mean, on steroids. So what I'm going to suggest to Chris, because we have another meeting in Canterbury in about a month's time, is that we put our heads together and we amplify this remedy so that it covers the next big genocide, which is the global one, where they're aiming at killing 6 billion people rather quickly, okay? Because that's the one, because when we're not being jabbed and not cooperating, we need a stronger remedy than some of us currently use, because it's going to be all hell breaking loose. So when I was in that shop in Wales saying, I can't do that, I can't put a mask on, it's against the law, right? I would amplify that now. I would say I would be colluding, I would be ancillary to genocide. Yeah, so we need to amplify this remedy. And I would take it even further, but then this is me. I would say that schooling is also a crime against humanity. And I prefer the phrase crime against men, women, boys and girls, to be quite honest, because they've hijacked that word humanity. But so we need to think broader about using this. This is a wonderful remedy, but I think we can use it in a much broader, immediate and collective environment. And hopefully Chris will agree to having a chat with me, and we could get other people in and come up with a document that broadens it out. Does that sound like an idea?
Yeah.
What about
I just want to add one thing. That's a brilliant idea, David. There have been at least 3 medical genocides in this country in the last 3 years.
Yes.
And there may be 5, so we're going to start to prosecute them. One of the best ways of stopping it in the future is prosecuting people like Whitty and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman for conduct ancillary to genocide. It doesn't have to be killed by bombs and rockets. If you're killed by a protocol which says administer DNR or take people out of hospital or administer this COVID jab and it leads to injury or death, that is genocide under this census. And the last thing I would suggest is, if you want to go into more of these crimes, look in detail in the International Criminal Court Elements of Crimes Regulations. There are 83 subsections in there, and they define in detail what you have to prove in these sort of situations. So look at it, it's well worth running through it. Again, try to do it in groups.
I know we can go on and on and on, and there's so much more to share, but I think we do need to get up, walk around, have a cup of tea. It's the bottom of what? I think we're a little bit late. What's time? 20 past 3? 20 past. So why don't we have a 15-20-minute break, and then come back, and then we're going to talk to or listen to David, talk about children and things. Is that right?
well, I'm going to flesh out something that Pete covered, which was the first, second, third title. I'm going to be calling it the first, second, third estate, its implications, and then putting it into context, 3 special contexts. Yeah.
Thanks, David. And I think we're planning to wrap up about 5, I think, today. 5 o'clock. So if you have any questions, you know, for any of the specific clever clubs here, do come and talk to us. Yeah, I would say after David we'll have a Q&A, which would be, yes, cool. Excuse me.
and